World Bank has raised Kenya's performance and institutional assessment rating to 3.8% for last year. For more on this, we now cross to Kenya. We're chatting to Shanta Devarajan, the chief economist for Africa at the World Bank. A very good morning to you, Shanta.
Morning.
Now, there's been a slight improvement in that index. As I said, it's risen by 0.1% to 3.8%. 2 of the 16 indicators showed a marginal improvement. We had gender equality being one of those. Now, since the promulgation of the new constitution, women's rights have said to be more at the forefront of the economy. Can you just give us an indication of what type of progress you're seeing on the ground when it comes to promulgation of women's rights?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to make one small correction. It's not 3.8%. The 3.8 is an index that goes from 1 to 6. And Kenya's score has gone from 3.6 to 3.8 over the last 3 years. So there's been progress of 0.1 per year over the last 3 years. Most of that progress has been coming from the extremely careful management of the macroeconomy. Kenya, as you may know, was one of the few countries not to get debt relief, and yet has maintained very low debt to GDP ratios. And it also has one of the most effective tax systems in sub-Saharan Africa. They collect about 22% of tax revenue, 22% of GDP in tax revenues. So there's been substantial progress on the macroeconomic front, which is one of the criteria we use in the country policy and institutional assessment. But then, as you pointed out, there's also been progress in another category, which we call equity. And in particular, the progress on women's access to land and finance and even political rights coming out of the Constitution. Now, this is still very early days in the Constitution, so even though the Constitution has in it many statutes in favor of equal rights for women, we're still seeing how it's being played out. So there might be opportunities for that score to increase even further, although I think there's still a long way to go in terms of land titling, which is a very complicated area, not just for women, but in general in these countries.
Now, the Kenyan...
but I also...
Sorry, carry on.
I just wanted to add that the one area where there's been somewhat less progress is the fourth category, which is governance, transparency, and the effectiveness of public administration, which has always been an area where Kenya has had some challenges. And I'm expecting that the new constitution, once it has been fully implemented, will show progress in these areas. But as I said earlier, it's a bit too early to tell.
And of course, the government has said recently in its budget that a larger portion is going to be going towards implementing that new constitution. Just let's look at another area where we also saw an improvement. It's in terms of prioritizing spending on the poor. Do you think the Kenyan government is doing enough to protect the poor, given the fact that we have had this drought in the East African economy and the poor have been particularly vulnerable to food shortages?
The Kenyan government has increased the amount of transfers going to the poor, both through the health and education system as well as in terms of direct transfers, particularly to protect, as you said, the people in the arid and semi-arid areas who are facing severe food shortages. But I think what's more important is to recognize how the Kenyan government is managing the current increase in food prices, brought on by increases in world food prices, where and they've done this before, they have introduced duty-free imports of maize, including GM maize, which is one way of making sure that there's adequate supply and that the prices don't get exceptionally high domestically, in particular that traders who speculate won't be able to speculate once the market is flooded with imported maize. Now, it's certainly clear that we can do better, and they can do a lot more. But it might not involve just putting more money into the system, but also making sure that that money is more effectively used. Kenya spends quite a bit of money on education, for instance, but there's been some studies that show that learning outcomes of children in public primary schools are really quite disappointing. And one reason for this might be that teachers are not present in the classroom. Some of them are holding second jobs. When they are present in the school, they're not spending very much time teaching. And of course, there is this problem of overcrowding in classrooms. So I think we need to look at the effectiveness of public spending as much as the quantity of public spending.
Of course, that is always something that we need to look at when we're looking at government budgets. Now, just another area that we'd like to touch on before we go, we've got a little bit of time. Uganda is one area where we've had broad-based demonstrations, political dissent against the President Museveni. He's had a 25-year stronghold on that economy. Corruption is rife in the country, or said to be rife in the country. What was the report's findings when it comes to the institutions and quality of policy at this stage?
Well, in many ways, Uganda is similar to Kenya in the sense that it's a reasonably well-managed macroeconomy, and structural policies have enabled the country to maintain relatively rapid economic growth and poverty reduction. But there, too, there are issues to do with governance, transparency, and the effectiveness of public administration. There's quite a lot of misallocation of funds between different uses of those funds in Uganda. The one difference, though, and you mentioned it, is that Kenya actually is a very much more open society and open media and more transparent, which actually strengthens and empowers citizens to hold governments accountable. I think the fact that I had Jeffrey Mao, the economic secretary, on another TV show this morning with me presenting the CPIA and discussing it shows that government officials are willing to be transparent about the quality of their policies and institutions. We don't see as much of that in a place like Uganda.